Buenas noches a todos, soy Takao Shimabukuro, Lead Product Manager en Inventum. Muchas gracias a todos por conectarse hoy a nuestra sexta edición de los Inventum Talks, que se está transmitiendo en paralelo por LinkedIn, Facebook y YouTube. Esta secuencia de diálogos ha sido creada para tratar temas clave para la educación tecnológica en el Perú, de la mano con expertos y referentes en el sector educativo, industrial, fabricantes de tecnología y del Estado. Particularmente trataremos temas de educación e industria 4.0, innovación, transformación digital, entre otros, con el objetivo de difundir conocimiento de valor a quienes nos siguen. La idea es conversar y debatir. Para los que recién conocen este formato, no queremos darles conferencias un poquito aburridas ni clases magistrales, por lo que estos Inventum Talks serán casi completamente abiertos. Sería ideal que, a medida que avance el diálogo con nuestros invitados, ustedes se sientan libres de expresar a través de nuestro chat sus opiniones, que con gusto incluiremos como parte de la sesión si fuera posible. La edición de hoy se titula Simulación y gamificación, innovación en la enseñanza de automatización. ¿Cómo puede ayudar el uso de simuladores para la enseñanza en carreras de ingeniería? ¿Qué elementos podrían diferenciar a un simulador educativo de uno industrial? ¿Podrían los simuladores llegar a reemplazar experiencias físicas? Para responder a esas interrogantes, hoy tenemos como invitada a especial a Adriana Silva. Adriana se nos une desde Portugal, dado que trabaja directamente en el desarrollo de software de simulación, específicamente Factory.io, que seguro algunos de ustedes ya están usando, como parte de la empresa Real Games. Adriana es máster en Ingeniería Mecánica por la Universidad de Porto, con especialidad en automatización, y se desempeña como ingeniera de software en Real Games. Dado que Adriana no habla español, conduciremos la entrevista en inglés, pero no se preocupen, los subtítulos estarán disponibles de inmediato a menos yo cambie el chip a inglés. Así que vamos a darle la bienvenida a Adriana. Hi, Adriana. Welcome
Hi,
to this
Takao.
edition of our Inventum Talks. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. So you're joining us from Portugal, right? It's like a 6 hours difference there.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the main reason, for example, that most of our audience would be watching me just in the morning, and Adriana is a little bit darker in the afternoon. So first, Adriana, you should know that it is not common at all for us to be speaking to someone so far away. Most of our guests here have been Peruvians and Latin Americans. And more importantly, it is not so common for us to be speaking to someone working directly on the development of the tools that are changing the way in which we teach future engineers, such as Factory.io. In that sense, I think everyone wants to know, what do you do at Real Games? What kind of projects do you work on involving Factory.io? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I can. So I'm generically a part of the development. Sorry. I'm part of the development team, and I'm currently working in the specification of new parts and drivers for the future Factory.io. But I do a bit of other things, like help with support requests from our clients, among other things. But right now, my focus is on the new parts and the drivers.
Awesome. So what you mean by drivers is that kind of you're working on new brands of PLCs, for example, that you will work directly with, or maybe compatibility issues between Factory.io and other devices?
I'd say yes to new drivers, as in not only improving the ones we have, but also expanding the brands we can allow our users to connect with. So we're hoping to expand the brands that the Factory.io can connect with.
And are we speaking only about PLCs, or maybe another kind of devices beyond PLCs?
For now, we're focusing on PLCs because Factory.io is a tool for PLC programming. Yeah. So that's our focus now, but who knows what will be next.
Awesome. And how is it to work in a company like Real Games? Is it like a serious traditional software company, or are you kind of, do you have a like a more modern approach like Google or YouTube? How is it to work there daily as you are, growing so fast?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit in the middle of the examples you gave. So it's a relaxed environment. Everybody gets along. Everybody is very nice. But we tend to be in our own corner, because we have a task, and so we're just focusing on our task.
Mhm.
We will eventually call a colleague to help us when we have some doubts. Everyone is very willing to help. We're all on the same boat, so we all have to work together. And I think it's something that you feel like there's no effort. It's not something that's forced. So everyone gets along. We have a relaxed environment. We can I don't I don't really know how to explain, but um, it's not like a very strict
Uh-huh.
environment, but it's not like too relaxed.
Yeah,
So I think it's a really nice balance between.
awesome. And do, in Real Games as a whole, do you only focus on this kind of simulators such as Factory.io or Home.io, or do you also work in other kind of projects?
Currently, we only have those, Factory.io and Home.io. I can't
Awesome.
I can't honestly tell you right now if we'll expand it, but for now, that's what we have.
Awesome. And just shifting a little bit to your personal experience, how did you end up in a software company being a mechanical engineer and also having a major in automation? How did you end up in developing stuff for a software company?
Okay, so it's a bit curious, so
Uh-huh.
to say, because during my degree, I had a few classes of programming. It was very basic stuff, Visual Basic, and nothing too complex. It was
Mhm.
really the basics. But it was enough to get me curious about the topic and interested. But in my degree here in mechanical engineering, there wasn't much more to it. Programming is not the focus because it's not a computer science degree.
Mhm.
But I did get that curiosity. And as I progressed in my degree and reached the point where they taught us automation, and I had my first contact with automation and PLC programming, it really brought up again that interest in programming. So I went with automation. When I finished my degree, and even before that, actually, my husband is also a software programmer. And so we would discuss different ways how to solve a problem with code and how to write the code, how to clean the code, and how to make it simpler. So all that was fuel for this passion. And when I finished my degree, I was lucky enough to have this opportunity. And it's an interesting, I ended up here, I think, mostly because I have an interest for programming and for mechanical engineering. And that's very interesting in the context of Factory.io because it's a program. So obviously you need programmers, but it's very close to mechanical engineering. So you need to have someone with that knowledge so you can implement things properly. So the simulator will be a good one. So that's
Awesome.
how I
So
ended up here.
yeah, so you found that Factory.io could be like the perfect mix between what you do and what you love, right? So you have your mechanical engineering degree, you have all this knowledge about machines and automation, how processes and machines work, and on the other hand, of course, you have a passion for software and developing, and that is awesome because I think that's the kind of future that is expecting for all of us engineers, right? I'm a mechatronics
Mhm.
engineer, and I know uh, really well this kind of merge between the IT part and the physical part.
Yeah.
And I think any day soon, every engineer, doesn't matter if they are mechanical engineers or chemical engineers, mechatronics, informatics, and anyone working in the industry will have to develop those both parts, right, of the equation.
I think so. Everything is
Awesome.
connected, so eventually I think that will happen in the industry.
And especially speaking about Industry 4.0, right? Like
Yes.
an engineer that's only on the physical plane will not be made, will not have, will maybe they will not have the same opportunities as the same engineers, but who also understand the software world, right?
Yes, I
Awesome.
agree.
And I know you used Factory IO while studying, right? Did you enjoy the experience? How did it help you learn, or which courses were taught using Factory IO?
Okay, so it was mainly PLC programming because the degree I took has a major in automation, but it's relatively small. And it has, or better yet, it's not that small, but when it comes to PLC and the kind of automation that I'm most interested in, which is the factory automation, it has a very small component. So I had one class with Factory IO a semester. So I think it helped me a lot because it's a very interesting tool. Like, how to explain? It's more interactive because you can build your own factory and then you can program it. And it doesn't matter if you have a physical PLC or a soft PLC, you can take it anywhere. So I could be at the lab in my university, I would be programming and I would have no issues with making a mistake. Like nothing would blow up. There was no risk. So it gave me that freedom and that security. And if I had some point in my program that I was locked in and I couldn't understand what was wrong, what was not working, I could just go home, take it with me. Once I get home, I can program it again and try to simulate the program and see what was wrong and keep trying. So in that regard, I think it was an extremely helpful tool because it gives that freedom with security.
Awesome. That's awesome, and I think that leads us to the second part of this interview, and that's about the core topic. Simulators.
Yes.
We value your experience in engineer. We value your experience working on real games, and of course, using simulators for education, such as Factory IO. So, after everything you've told us now, how could we summarize this kind of value simulators can generate for future engineering students or for future engineers? Right? You've spoken about freedom. You've spoken about security. What other things do you think simulators could add to engineering careers?
Okay, so I would like just to say first that it depends, because it depends on the subject that you are teaching or learning. In a generic way, simulators have very interesting advantages. Like I've mentioned, they're portable, so you can take them anywhere. They require less equipment, and because they require less equipment, they don't require so much maintenance. And because they don't require maintenance or equipment, it's cheaper. And as I've mentioned, there's the security. There's no risk of damaging the equipment. There's no risk of someone getting hurt. And those are the advantages that are common to the most simulators. Then it depends on the subject. For example, if we're talking about PLC training, which is the case of Factory IO, then there are other advantages particular to Factory IO in the context of PLC training. We offer the possibility of programming with different platforms, such as our own Control.io or TIA Portal or CodeSys, among others. And the student, as I've mentioned, can practice without fear of consequences because there's no damage to be done. They can learn by trial and error, and that can benefit them because we tend to learn more about the errors and our mistakes. And there's obviously the flexibility of building your own factory, interacting with things. But if we look at Factory IO as a tool to learn how to install the PLC, tighten the screws, connect the cables, then in that regard, Factory IO is useless. It only has disadvantages because it's not made for that. And you'd have to find a different simulator. So it depends on the simulator, it depends on the subject. But overall, it's always there. I think the advantages will usually outweigh the disadvantages of simulators.
So maybe, Adriana, we could be speaking like how simulators and physical equipment could reach a some kind of equilibrium and some kind of balance, because of course you could use simulators to learn how to program, to learn about the logic of programming, for example. In the case of PLCs, of course, other subjects would be
Yes.
kind of different. But of course, nothing replaces the experience of connecting a cable, of tightening screw, of
Yes.
Of looking for a plug because you need a plug to energize a device, right?
Yeah.
And of course, after knowing that physical part, knowing the programming previously with a simulator, you almost enhance or accelerate your learning experience, right?
Yes.
And I would also highlight what you said, and I had never thought about it before, actually, is that simulators give you the advantage of trial and error. You cannot usually do that with physical equipment.
Yeah.
We in Inventum sell physical equipment for learning about PLCs, but of course it is almost a must that you cannot make mistakes. Actually, you try to learn, but you cannot make mistakes, because in any other way you will burn everything that's on the
Yeah.
on the training station. And thinking about that is not so that is not so right for learning. We learn from our mistakes, actually, right?
Yes.
And if I recall my experience as an engineer, I don't know you, but maybe it's possible. I I uh, I broke lots of things back in my time as a student, and I had to pay for many things. But I think just with that mistake is that you learn more about the topic you are trying to dominate, right?
Yes, that's the thing. When you make a mistake or an error, there will be consequences. Usually not pleasant ones. Like you said, something breaks, something burns, and obviously that leaves an impression on us. And I think that's why we learn most with our mistakes. So having the freedom to do this, to learn by trial and error, is interesting precisely because you don't have the fear of, one, breaking something and having to pay for it, and second, of hurting yourself or someone else that's in the room with you. So yeah, we think that's a big advantage of simulators in the general.
Awesome. And is there any kind of difference between simulators and virtual reality? Could we consider uh, Factorio as being kind of virtual reality software, or is there any main difference between these kind of terms?
Okay, so I think they are related to a certain point because virtual reality does simulate something. But I think they can also be quite detached from one another and be very different things, because you can use virtual reality in a game, and that's very separate from a simulator. But I do think that they are at the same time related, and they can be integrated with each other. Like having virtual reality in a simulator would expand the experience a lot. It would make it so much more immersive, and it would take it to a whole new level, really. So while they can be separate things, they can also be very close, tight-knit with each other. So again, it depends on what you want to do and what you want to use it for.
So maybe the main difference, as you say, would be like the degree of immersion that the user has with the interface, right? Simulators are
Yeah.
much more like third person or third party experience,
Yes.
and virtual reality is more like a real kind of 3D 360 experience.
Yeah, much more first person.
Yeah, and what about the other term, that's gamification? Is gamification included in simulation software like Factor.io? And what advantages could a professor or teacher take from gamification in software? And of course, why not in their own activities to enhance learning?
Okay, so I think the most obvious advantages of gamification are the increase in motivation of students, the increase in their involvement, because it would be more interactive. And nowadays, more and more people have had some kind of contact with games or have consoles of some sort, or have played games in any way, be it on your smartphone or on a console. So there would be, as I was saying, the involvement, the interaction, and obviously, hopefully, this would lead to better results. So there are always advantages and benefits that can be taken from gamification. However, when we talk, for example, about gamification in Factory.io, which is our context, we've never really had requests for gamification. So that's part of the reason why we personally don't have game-like features such as achievements or levels or rewards. But it's not something that we exclude from our plans. It's not something requested, but it's something we might consider in the future. But it depends on the value that it will bring to the users. How much will they benefit of that? And how far does it make sense for us to include it? But yeah, I think overall there could be advantages, but how you implement it is something that would need to be more deeply considered.
Yeah, but now that you mention it, I think anyway, if any kind of simulator does not include, the right, or not the right, but the official degree of gamification for it to consider the game, for it to be considered the game. Anyway, the teacher of the professor that's in charge of developing the experience with the simulator could include gamification, right? Because I will give you an example. Just a month ago, and also last year, we were sponsors for a engineering congress here that's organized by students in many universities, and they wanted us to, propose or to ideate a challenge for teams of students to participate and win prizes. And we designed a scenario on Factor.io, and we actually designed like 3 kinds of scenarios. The easy one for students in first year, the intermediate one for students in second and third year, and the advanced one for students in fifth year. Here in Latin America, we study 5 years of baccalaureate.
Okay.
And and the teams were involved in solving these problems because they wanted a prize, and they needed to demonstrate that they followed the right procedure. They needed to explain why they were using some kind of tools, because they were free to use TIA Portal or Codices or something related to Modbus and all that. And I think that added a degree of gamification to the Factor.io experience. And why not? Teachers could also use that approach in their classes, right? Have different levels of scenarios, like the ones Factor.io allows them to build, and reward students for solving those. I think there would be a nice enhanced experience using the simulator, right?
Yes, I see what you say, what you mean, and yes, that's a way of doing it perfectly fine. It includes gamification, and it would definitely grab the attention of the students and motivate them to solve the issue. The main issue I see is the reward part. I don't know if every teacher would be able to give some reward, and then it depends on the reward they're giving, and it also depends on the students they have, because not everyone will accept a certain reward. So I think it's perfectly possible of implementing something like that. I think it might have some limitations.
Yeah, you are completely right. I think we do have to think about it a little bit more. But another example that comes to my mind right now is that whenever we develop some kind of material or training material or guide for our clients to use using Factory AO, whenever you finish, an official experience or an official training guide, at the end you have an optional challenge, right? And if you solve that optional a little bit more complex challenge, you'll earn 2 points more in your total qualification. So maybe that's a little bit less aggressive approach, and that could bring those students who do want to solve the problem a nicer experience, right?
Yes, that's not only a good way to call those students that want to go the extra mile. It could also serve as the reward you need. Oh, if you complete this task, if you can program correctly this scene, you get these extra points in your final grade. That's a way of rewarding them without having to include money, for example. So
Yeah,
that
yeah,
seems like
of course.
a really good idea of how to implement it.
Yeah, no, money and physical prices would not be a part of the equation, mainly because of legal issues, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what I want to close this section with is, as you told us, most, I think 100% of new generations, maybe with some exceptions, have had any kind of contact with video games, right? Like they're part of life now. Even us, I know you are just as young as me. We'll not speak about ages now, but I don't know how much time you spend on video games weekly. We already have jobs. We're already working and studying, and we're like adults now.
Yeah.
But definitely, I spend a couple of hours every now and then on the weekends, or maybe on weekdays, just for relaxing on video games, right? And they are a way to interact with new people. They are a way to relax. They are a way to challenge yourself to do new stuff. And I think that's inevitable. Do you play video games yourself, Adriana?
Yes, yes. I'm not exactly an addict, but I definitely play a few games. I have a few consoles at home. My husband does also collaborate a lot in that regard. So yeah, we also love games because we grew with the beginning of consoles, and well, not really the beginning, not that old, but yeah, we play a lot at home. Like you said, balance work and all that, but every now and then, for sure, a few hours.
Yeah, and I think also us growing with technology and video games is the main reason that we learn better in this kind of virtual environment, like, right? Maybe older generations did need a training guide and a manual and a booklet, a quick start guide to read. But now, for us, just having a software there, having a game there, and just learning how to do it, and having a small tutorial and watching videos on YouTube and learning by ourselves is totally natural. So I think that would be also a nice uh, reason for more professors and more teachers to implement this kind of software and gamification like experiences in their classroom. Adriana, would you like to add anything else to this main topic about simulation gamification advantages of virtual reality and simulators?
No, I think I've said everything I could think of.
Awesome. So let's get to the third part now. Let's speak about the future, or maybe already the near future now. We have spoken about using Factory.io and other similar simulators for automation training. Generally speaking, which other areas or topics in higher education could be impacted by simulators and games? Do you have any experience on that? Have you heard about which other careers are using simulators too?
Okay, so I think I haven't heard of any specific cases, but I do think that simulators can be used in any area, really. I mean, we now can see simulators for almost anything. You have flight simulators, truck simulators, goat simulators, so it can be expanded to any area, really. I think it, once again, depends on the subject you are teaching. And the impact it will have will also depend on the subject. Like we mentioned before, if you're talking PLC programming, then the impact will be extremely positive, for example, while using factory I/O, because it allows you to do everything you need for PLC programming. Even if you don't have a physical PLC, but have access to a soft PLC, you have the whole experience in a software. But if you're talking about, for example, as we've mentioned, the installation of equipment, then there will be gaps, because in a simulator, you'd be connecting the cables or the screws with your mouse. And in real life, you'll be using both of your hands and you'll be touching things. And that experience, as we've mentioned, is totally different. And the impact it will have on the students' learning and knowledge at the end of the course will be different. But I think it's a bit, as we've mentioned, the physical equipment and the simulator will complement each other.
Yeah, and as you're saying this, I recall my first experience in a factory. And before working at Inventum and the education sector, I worked in a jewelry factory as I was an intern there for a year. And I remember that my first project for automation was, to automate some kind of process. And I said, okay, I need a PLC, right? I've learned that in the university, but I only knew how to program the PLC. When I learned in my automation class, the PLC was already there. It already had all the cables. It was already turned on. So I just connected my Ethernet cable and opened the TIA portal or open any other kind of software and did everything right so it could work. But then I went to the factory and I said, okay, I need you to buy me a PLC so I can start my work. And they got me the PLC, but I didn't know that the PLC needed a power source, right? It was so obvious, but I didn't know it. It needed a power source. It needed a plug. It needed to be connected with cables. I needed, some protection devices. I needed to buy the license for TIA Portal, right? And I didn't have any of that. and I started working, slowly learning about those. So I think that the balance between the physical world and the simulators does have to exist. And that gives us, the next question. Do you think simulators will ever replace physical training equipment? I think that the answer is already clear, right?
Yeah, so I think it depends, once again, on the subject, because like I've mentioned, you'll have situations where you can completely use only the simulator, like factory I/O with a soft PLC, when you want to focus on the programming. If you want, like you've said, to prepare the students to have some contact with the PLC physically, connect a cable, if you want to give all that knowledge to the student, then the simulator will not replace completely, because that experience with the material is very important. It's totally different from using a mouse to use your own two hands. And there are other situations where it completely replaces it without even the option of complementing with physical equipment. Like you want to test some security, for example, in a rocket. It's not a good idea to try to do it with a real rocket and real people. So that would probably be completely in a simulator. Then there are other situations where the simulator will do a very teeny tiny part of the learning experience. But I think it depends on the situation. Maybe yes, maybe not.
Yeah, so maybe we're speaking about, different factors such as maybe the time that's available. Maybe if time is short, a simulator would be the best option. Costs involved, the kind of features that want to be tested, and it requires, a kind of a more in-depth evaluation of what is needed and what actually wants to be achieved, and that would be the right evaluation for someone to just use a simulator or both stuff or just physical equipment, right? And I think that leads us to conclude that simulators would be, the right tool for the new era of hybrid classrooms, right? Where students can spend some time at home, and they can also spend some time at laboratories. Do you have any experience, for example, with Factory IO, with your clients in any university? I don't know if you know the universities that are working with that in Peru, but maybe in Portugal, that are using Factory IO in a hybrid, in a hybrid context or mode.
Okay, so I don't know of any specific case,
Uh-huh.
but I know that in Portugal, some classes are still, I think it's a bit rare now, but there are still some hybrid class. Most of them are going back to the in-person, but there are still some hybrid classes, and it works perfectly. The teacher can use, for example, if we're talking about online classes for the theoretical part of the subject, for the theoretical concepts, Factory IO works because the professor can share the screen and use Factory IO to illustrate something, to give an example of something, of a problem, a factory, whatever he wants to show. And students can either program at home if they want, or they can go to the lab and work with a physical PLC or a soft PLC if they want to. So it doesn't change much because it's the same experience, precisely because of the advantage that Factory IO as a simulator has, which is it's portable and it works the same way anywhere you are. So I think it's perfectly usable, and sometimes it just depends on how the people want to use it, because it's really up to the user. But I think it works perfectly with any regimen way of giving classes, be it on person or hybrid online.
And I think that that's also something that I've just realized now. Factory.io is not 2 or 3 years old. I mean, Factory.io goes way back in time before the pandemic, right? So
Yes.
Factory.io was not designed specifically for virtual education, right? It was designed to be a tool used inside universities and institutes, right?
Yes. We were. Factory IO was born precisely as an educational tool. It was always meant to be used in classes, and
Yeah.
as you said, it was way before the pandemic. Factory IO. I don't know exactly how old Factory IO is.
Yeah.
The company is 16 years old, and we've been doing simulators as an educational tool since the beginning. So yeah, it was always our objective. That's why it works in any system of classes, hybrid or not.
Awesome. And maybe that leads me to ask, why is Factorio focused on education? What was the purpose of, having the name Real Games, but not actually developing games, but focusing on education? Did you see any trend uh, going on that motivated you as a company to take that path?
Okay, so I can't completely give you a real answer because I'm not. So I'm recent at the company, so
Yeah.
I'm not completely inside the details.
Uh-huh.
But from what I know, it started precisely as while our founder was in university. So he
Mm.
grew interested in 3D and simulators, and he decided to create this tool. And he developed it with collaboration of teachers from the university. And I think all that context led to an educational tool.
Wow. Awesome, Adriana. So we're just about to finish this talk, but I wanted to ask one more question, just if it were possible. If it is not possible, just tell us, and uh, uh, we'll just simulate that this did not happen. But could you give us a sneak peek of what future factorial features look like more drivers, more components in the library, more process variables? People are asking it will be ever possible that you could, upload your own designs to the factory. Is there anything you would like to share with us?
Okay, so obviously there are limits to what I can say.
Yeah.
What I can say is that we've been looking at Factory IO, and it's not been built originally to be extended, to add new things. So we are currently working in the development of the future, what will happen next. And we have been listening to our community, and we want to evolve in a way that lets us give response to that feedback and to the requests, like you've said, new parts and drivers. So we are well into development of the next Factory IO. So we have a few things. We can't really disclose much because we don't want to compromise anything. But I think people can look forward to what we have in store. At the right time, things will be announced. But we are trying to go in
as
the
fast
direct.
as you can.
Yes.
Awesome. So we're speaking like a Factory IO, 2, right?
Yes.
A renewed version of Factory IO rather than just a small update.
Maybe we're still studying how it will be done, but we definitely want to at least bring new things for our community. I can give you a bit more information. One of the features we are studying, it's still in the open and it can still be discarded. It's the VR, as we've mentioned before. We would like to have it in our software because it would expand a lot. It would allow users to touch buttons, use an HMI, turn knobs, hit something, mess with a sensor, So we want to use it. We are studying if we can use it, how we can use it, and we hope it will be a feature in the future. But as I've mentioned, there are no promises, no guarantees, and it's still in the open.
Wow. I think that my mind's really dark, but I also thought that maybe with virtual reality, you could also have like accidents in the factory, so you could gain awareness about security.
Yes, that would be an amazing feature.
Yeah, so you could die in virtual reality because of a mistake. That's awesome, Adriana. Is there anything else you would like to comment on just finishing this talk?
Nope, there's nothing. I think I've mentioned everything.
Awesome. So, all right, we're now almost over with this sixth Inventum talk, Adriana. Thank you so much for being with us here. This has been truly valuable for us and surely to our audience. So I think that's it, Adriana. Do you want to say goodbye to our viewers right now?
Yes, I'd like to thank you again for the invitation and for having me. It was a pleasure. I hope our watchers have learned a lot about simulators and the experience, its advantages and disadvantages, how it can be used, how it can benefit students and teachers. And I hope they all enjoy this, and
Awesome.
I don't know, a good study.
Awesome. So I will switch to Spanish now just to say goodbye to our viewers, and we'll close the stream.
Okay.
Bien. Muchas gracias a todos por escucharnos hoy. Antes de terminar, quisiera invitar a cualquier interesado en Factory IO, para nosotros el mejor software de enseñanza de automatización con PLC, a solicitar una demostración del software escribiéndonos a contacto@inventum.pe. Lo estamos poniendo en el chat ahora mismo. O pueden entrar a nuestra página y hacerle clic al formulario de contacto para conversar acerca del software y, por qué no, organizar una clase gratuita para ustedes. Bien. Nos vemos. Gracias por habernos escuchado hoy. Muy buenas noches.